I've been thinking about this recently. If I could talk back to that 17-year-old who was doing regional theater in Rochester, I would say, guess what? It's going to go pretty well. It's going to be a lot of ups and downs. I'm not going to tell you the specifics because you get too scared, but it turns out in a good place, and it never will get better than it is right now. So just appreciate where you are. 3, 2, 1. I'm Robert Downey Jr., and this is the timeline of my career.
That tornado scared me so much it made my hair disappear.
Have any hair on your balls?
I'm afraid to look.
Pound is a film that my dad got the financing for. I think the investors thought he was making a documentary about pounds and animal shelters, and then he said, no, it's a live action thing, and I'm casting people to play the dogs. Next thing you know, we're shooting it, and these character actors of all shapes and sizes are playing various dogs, and then I played a puppy. My earliest memories are of cameras being on sets, being on stages, being on location, to the point where it almost seemed like life was kind of making a movie and kind of being a kid. At the same time, because my folks were mostly underground, kind of counterculture, it was never like I saw later on, like my friends like Jason Bateman, who literally grew up in the high-end, multi-camera TV show stuff. Our stuff was really weird. So there was always something that felt a little bit outsiderish about it.
Remember the infamous coffee cup?
Oh, no, don't, please.
Oh, yes. How to seduce Blair without really trying.
And there it is. There's a smile. It's nice to see it again.
I'm cast with Andrew McCarthy, James Spader, Jamie Gertz, and there's a scene on a tennis court where I'm asking my dad if I can come home, and it was kind of an impactful, bit of a challenging scene to do. My first day shooting, and the director, Marek Kaniewska, who I argue is one of the greats I ever got to work with, said, "Everybody be absolutely quiet. He's trying to concentrate." And I felt like he told everybody, "Hey, this is important." And then I was like, "Oh my God, I guess I better concentrate." And I just thought for a quarter second about what's it like for all fathers and sons, mothers and daughters. Are they ever going to connect? Can they ever understand each other? And just having that thought in my head gave me this springboard. And it wound up being a kind of a pivotal day where I felt it was the first time I felt I was taken seriously in a dramatic way.
I just need you to be my father for one goddamn day and just help me. I mean, can't you tell when I'm telling the truth?
No.
If anything less than zero showed me that there was a cultural relevance to filmmaking, I'd seen it in The Breakfast Club and a bunch of other films, and there was something about our generation had some sort of valid statement to make in the filmmakers and artists of that period, and you felt like, God, maybe I could be one of those folks.
Very formal, everybody. What the hell? Gone crazy.
Chaplin was an absolute gift and a real bear of a challenge for someone who's 25 when I started prepping to do it. But there were all these people that were still around, just barely still around, like Johnny Hutch, who came from the Benny Hill show, and he knew the guy who'd really done these choreographed things at the Carno Theater with Chaplin. So he actually had access to some of the books of really what the choreography was for some of this stuff. And he drilled me incessantly for months and months and months. And then having Dickie Attenborough direct it, he was like the Yoda of cinema. And just the fact that he cast me obviously was the endorsement. And then it was just this year process of shooting it. At a certain point, I had a one-way mirror with a TV playing VHS tapes of his old films, and I would try to match up where his face was in mine and literally just mimic him for hours and hours over a course of weeks and months. I employed every single way I could try to show up for that role. When you're 25 and you're given the keys to the kingdom, you're going to probably come out of center. Maybe out of fear, maybe out of confidence. And for me, at that point, not to boast, but I was as much of a Chaplin expert as anyone involved in the project. And I was making corrections to the things that were factually and historically inaccurate.
To which Attenborough said, "But Poppet, we're making a film, it's not a documentary."
I did learn at that point, though, that it's hard to tell a story any more interestingly than the way it actually occurred. So I was saying, right before Chaplin did a film called The Kid with Jackie Coogan, his wife had had a miscarriage. So that was his way of healing from the trauma of that loss.
And he was like, "Robert, the audience," I was like, "It's too episodic, we have to make this have more moment."
Anyway, you realize you're not the director when you're not directing, but a great director will incorporate all of your strong associations and the things that you feel are really important and find a way to help you get him into the character.
I didn't want him to come in on it. He insisted. I said, "You gotta stay at home," but he doesn't listen to me. He's such a stupid son of a bitch. I killed him, didn't I? Oh, my fault. I'm sorry.
Wow. Sorry. Hey, good luck.
Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, that was a film shot entirely at night. I think there was 1 day shoot and 1 split. So the rest of the time we're getting to work at sundown and we were working all through the night, every night. So Shane Black is a night owl. Shane Black is a legitimate genius. And he'd written what I thought was almost a perfect script. And then Val Kilmer and I had kind of fallen into this good repartee. And at that point, I'd never played a character who was so overtly not intelligent, but lovable. And I think it was very freeing for me because I'd hitherto been associated with these kind of fast-talking, smart guys, which I'm not necessarily. I've just had some experience doing it. And Harry Lockhart in Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, he's kind of a dummy. And it was so freeing for me.
What happens when they drag the lake? You think they'll find my pistol? Jesus. Look up idiot in the dictionary. You know what you'll find?
A picture of me?
No! The definition of the word idiot, which you fucking are.
As far as working with Val on Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, he's Val Kilmer. It's vintage Val Kilmer. He comes in with such an kind of off-center point of view on things, and yet he's playing the one who knows everything and he's smart and he thinks that Harry is kind of an idiot, but they become friends. So I just found it so delightful to be staying up all night with Val Kilmer shooting these ridiculous scenes about these two oddballs that are chasing this kind of my case and your case, they're the same case. He's a really sophisticated artist and I have nothing but fond memories about Kiss Kiss Bang Bang.
Dave, just one thing. Is it true they got a print off the cap?
Yeah, they got a partition in blood. But that is not for publication.
Oh, hey, come on. Hey, it's me.
Did he say they got a print?
Partial.
Working with David Fincher on Zodiac was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He is an absolute master of this art form. And I remember also the subject matter is really, really intense. And so it wasn't like, a fancy free set. And because I knew that this was something that was really part of David's own history, of his own kind of contemplation of evil, you're trying to serve the director and be respectful of that. But I remember, Ruffalo and Gyllenhaal and I looking at each other knowing we're getting a real education in doing things in an extremely disciplined way. That said, when I watch the film, there's a lot of kind of like fun and lightness in it, which David Fincher always knows how to capture. It's just not, he doesn't lean into any sort of indulgence. He's a really disciplined guy. And then the crazy thing is David Fincher is your best lunch date you could ever have. He's so fun, he's so witty, and yet when you look at his work, he doesn't take himself seriously, but boy does he take his film seriously.
That's the only place that word and that symbol ever appeared together before the letters. Guy stole his logo off a watch.
How can somebody who's killed 13 people...
He claims he's killed 13 people, but which ones can we actually confirm? There's 3 in Vallejo, 1 in Berryessa, the cabbie, that's it. Bobby, you almost look disappointed.
Working with David Fincher, you will learn that you're more durable than you thought. A scene can devolve into where it just feels really perfunctory and you're kind of almost on an automatonic mode, but it doesn't matter because the craft of trying to get things done, like there was a scene where he was trying to get it done in 1 shot and we had to have done 40 or 50 takes. And people were a little bit exasperated. He said, Downey, come here, do we have it yet? And I watched the takes, and at the end of it, I said, you want to use this in 1? He goes, yeah. I go, he goes, Downey's right, we don't have it yet. Delete all 40 of those takes and we'll start again after lunch. And everyone looked at me like, what the fuck is... But, right is right.
The truth is, I am Iron Man.
No problem trusting Jon Favreau. His films Zathura and Kiss Kiss Bang Bang came out on the same weekend and tanked. And I think we were both really hungry to try to reestablish ourselves as a formidable duo, albeit individually. Again, just like Attenborough, his endorsement of me to play that character. And then Kevin Feige having the wherewithal to say, okay, bit of a risk, let's do it. We like risk. Wound up being, a life-changing 15 years.
Tony,
what?
It's gonna be okay, okay? It's gonna be okay. I am gonna make this okay.
Oh. Okay, you're gonna attach that to the base plate and make sure you... Was that so hard? That was fun, eh?
Anytime I was with Jeff Bridges, and maybe even more so with Paltrow, you just felt that there was this chemistry where you always kind of got the definitive version of a scene, whether it was loosely scripted or a little bit more prepared. But there's a scene where he's doing a weapons test, and he says, is it better to be feared or respected? Is it too much to ask for both? And John and I were literally writing that line for line as we went along shooting it that day. And I put on sunglasses because it was all on cue cards. It was that kind of thing where you go, it's more important that we feel like we're just coming up with this and we like it, and there's no trick we can't employ to cover the fact that we're kind of making it up as we go along. But again, because you have that huge cluster bomb explosion in back of him, because the air mover kind of pushed me forward, and it was just one of those days. There was another moment where Tony has escaped the cave and essentially become Iron Man, and he lands in this kind of crater outside the cave where he's being held. And there was a windstorm that day, and we were trying to get this take, and it was very Star Wars-esque in a way. It was very reminiscent of what John has wound up doing since with Mandalorian. And there was just this moment where it's like this storm kind of settled, and everyone kind of looked at everyone, we were like, let's get one more take, and that's the one that's in the film. So it even felt like sometimes the elements themselves were conspiring to help us do our best job. Every film is an art film if you treat it that way, and the most important films can be garbage, but it's always about teams and leadership and partnership. Also that audiences evolve really quickly. Like they'll assimilate a new kind of version of a genre, and then they'll phase out of it, and you have to keep meeting and exceeding their expectations. And I think that's where, now we're in such an interesting spot, because it's kind of like anyone's game, anticipating what audiences will respond to next. And I think it has really put the cinematic and TV community on point.
I did what I thought was right.
I didn't just graduate from law school, I graduated first in my class. Good. I was first in my class. I did really well, Dad.
You're welcome.
Fuck.
David Dobkin, I wanted to be in Fred Claus, and I had seen The Wedding Crashers, and I was like, I love this David Dobkin guy. Turns out we kind of almost knew each other back in upstate New York back in the day. And he'd had this idea, kind of a dramatization of a version of how he'd had this strained relationship with his father. And then we started talking about great movies like The Verdict. It's such a rich, fertile zone to try to dig in,
What was your reasoning? 180 days, that's solid. Maybe it cooled off. Maybe he doesn't kill Hope. Maybe we're not here. All the years you sat on that bench, all the people that stood before you. The leniency, the understanding the free ride goes to Mark Blackwell. How do you explain that lapse in judgment?
We were really fortunate and that I had such goodwill from Warner Brothers with having done several Sherlock films with them that they're like, yeah, we don't know if this one's really a fiscal win for us, but we love the script, go shoot it. And those days are over.
It's just because the window's closing a bit, it seems.
Is there anything that you feel like you need to process in relation to the possibility of not seeing him again?
I just don't know.
Senior, which is the documentary I did about my pops with Chris Smith and my long-suffering Mrs. Susan Downey, started off as kind of a pre-pandemic and then into the pandemic. For me, I'll just be honest, it was a bit of an avoidance technique, in that I knew he was in the throes of Parkinson's, which is an awful disease. And I'm not great at confronting inevitabilities always, but it's almost like it was this journey for me to, in my mid-50s, kind of like grow up and take responsibility for framing how I had experienced my childhood and now how I related to that parent as he was kind of, in the last years of his life.
You two met before?
You mean Junior and I?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're getting to know each other. I think anyone who sees Senior, it can be a tough watch, but I would suggest that you find your way through it, because there was a certain point where my dad made these very avant-garde movies and they didn't always even seem like they had a plot. And we had amassed all this footage in Senior, and Susan came to me, she said, you can't make this documentary like one of your dad's movies. This has to have an act 1, 2, and 3. And I was like, well, what's act 3? And then act 3 wound up being his passing and us kind of figuring out a way to ingest that and make sense of it. I don't know that there was any one part that was difficult. When we started watching Senior, we saw it at the Telluride Film Festival. We screened it in San Francisco at the same theater, the Castro, where I had been with my dad, when his films were coming out in the 70s. And so for me, it was more like I would be watching the film and it was the story of my life with him and his death, but it also wound up being this kind of thing of, it brought me almost back to Chaplin, where you make art of your life and your life is kind of a movie, but it's not. It was this very surreal experience. And then there was just the grieving part of it where, and I think it's why some people say, I wish I'd been able to do something like this for one of my parents or a loved one, is that it becomes this kind of touchstone, and it's a way to have a mechanism by which you can process a loss. So I'm super fortunate to have it there, and I think it'll be something that I use as a kind of a bit of a self-help tool for years to come.
I can't believe it. Well, here we are. Catch me up. What do we know?
One of our B-29s over the North Pacific has detected radiation.
Do we have the filter papers?
There's no doubt what this is.
White House says there's a doubt.
Wishful thinking, I'm afraid.
Are those the long-range detection filter papers?
It's an atomic test.
The Russians have a bomb.
There's two Nolans. There's the Nolan before you've worked for him, where he's kind of this very distant Oz-like figure. He's just held, as we all know, in this very particular esteem because his acumen and his mastery of this medium. And then there's what happens as you approach and get into the system that he uses. It's so hard to explain, but he's a very, very singular fella. So even the screen tests felt important, and not important in a frou-frou, high-status way. There's just an energy and an intensity to what he does. So, and then take the subject matter. And then the fact that he's asking me to kind of transform into someone who's extremely subtle and plotting, who doesn't have any punchlines, who's only charming when he's trying to manipulate or undermine. I found that to be a great challenge. And Chris Nolan had said he was likening it a bit to Amadeus, where there's a Mozart and that's not you. Sometimes you're Mozart, usually you're Mozart, this time you're Salieri. And so I really took that to heart as him kind of challenging the entirety of my career trajectory and saying, don't use any of those things that have served you well, find new resources.
Now the race is against the Soviets.
Not unless we started.
Robert, they just fired a starting gun. What's the nature of the device they detonated?
Data indicates it may have been a plutonium implosion device.
Like the one you built at Los Alamos.
There's something about Strauss that I find he's very conservative and very devoted and very much lived a life of service. It reminds me a little bit of my grandfather, who was a captain and did multiple tours in World War II, and then came back and had a glass company and did all the glass for the Chrysler building. I mean, those old American lives where you go like, wow, that was a really exceptional generation. But I also know this thing of comparison of why don't I have what he or she or they have? It's ugly. And it's a preoccupation, I think, that is can be particular to a kind of American exceptionalism. And so with all these forces that were at play during the Cold War, it was great for me to have held this position of kind of a righteous indignation with what all these liberal geniuses were up to. In a way, I felt like I got to be a critic of what might be a perception of myself or others throughout the entirety of my career. And so I got to do that counterpoint. It was almost like I was in a debate with the aspects of myself that I have glorified, and I was able to look at each one of them and say, that's not entirely right, and maybe you don't deserve that. And it's been a great dialogue. And I have a feeling part of the reason Nolan wanted me to do this was to give me that kind of 180 perspective. But I also, at the end of the day, I truly believe that Louis Strauss did everything he did for reasons that he thought were correct. And I don't mean that like a superhero bad guy. I mean that legitimately as a human being. So I find it really kind of fascinating that I'm still a little bit up in the air about who was on the right side of history. It's like a currency, the cultural significance of cinema and films and TV. And I think that part of my generation, just like part of the Maverick generation, part of it was kind of, yeah, this is nothing. You know, we're so cool. We're really like dark and brooding. And honestly, it's a privilege. It's a matter of precision and discipline and sacrifice to be able to do it correctly. And I think that's been the one lesson that I've over a long period of time been able to finally assimilate and accept.